China, digitization, easy money, and debt. What do these four topics have in common? They're all addictions of America. Addictions that are going to be painful to break. Bruce Mehlman, one of Washington, D.C.'s top lobbyists, just released a presentation on the four addictions, and he joins us today. I'm Ed D'Agostino, and this is Global Macro Update from Malden Economics. Bruce Mehlman, it's always good to see you. Appreciate it. We had a good time speaking together at the Strategic Investment Conference recently. And then right after the conference, you released this fantastic new slide deck. What I really like about it is I think everyone knows now that something's different in this economy. In the whole world, something's changed. I think a lot of people were waiting post-COVID for things to go back to normal. And there's this sort of slow realization that there's a new normal now. And you did a great job with your latest slide deck of crystallizing what changed, why we're in this new inflationary environment that's going to be with us for a long time. And you highlight four addictions, the four addictions of the United States that need to be addressed in order for the country to move forward. Can you walk us through those four addictions, just top level, and then we'll kind of dig into each one individually?
You bet, Ed, and thanks so much for both having me at the conference, but also having me back here on your great program, which I religiously watch. The macro theory is that it more looks at this century, and it looks at the first 2 decades of this century, when we became increasingly reliant on China, on digital technologies, on easy money, which, low interest rates from the Fed, quantitative easing, and on debt, on spending beyond our means. And this is certainly the United States, but it's frankly true all around the world. And what I observe is that those four dependencies grew and have become unsustainable, in part accelerated. The negative externalities got accelerated through COVID, through the Russian invasion of Ukraine, through just broader changes, whether demographics or climate. And we've now reached a point of unsustainability. Our dependence on China, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute, is now dangerously unsustainable. Same with technology, which is overwhelmingly net positive, but the lack of any controls creates more risk than we want. Inflation proves we can no longer rely on easy money as a solution to difficult problems, and likewise, we'll see how long we can continue to pile debt on top of debt. It feels unsustainable, but to be fair, I've been saying that for decades.
Yeah, a lot of us have. Though it seems like, maybe we could just start with debt, because just the fact that it's starting to be discussed. And as angst-ridden as the debt ceiling negotiations have been, and at the time of this filming, it looks like they'll be resolved, but it's not over till it's over, right? The fact that debt is being discussed in this country more broadly, I think is a positive, because the longer we kick this can down the road, the harder it's going to be to finally deal with this massive debt that deficit that we run every year.
You're right, although to acknowledge the fact that, we deficit panickers have been panicking for a long time. The very last slide in the slide deck includes magazine covers going back to the 70s and the 80s, talking about the debt bomb and how America can't continue to have the debt that we have, and it's unsustainable and the world's going to come to an end. And while you and I and Malden all believe there's a great reset got to be coming, we would have said the same thing a decade ago coming out of the Great Recession. And we would have said the same thing. We did say the same thing in the 2000 aughts. So if you look to me, the big macro historical thing is that empires have ended in part over debt and often over disease, whether it's the Roman Empire, the British Empire, the Soviet Empire. And we know that debt inherently is spending your future resources on behalf of your present circumstances. If you're in a war, if you have a global pandemic, that kind of makes sense. But we were at $1 trillion deficit annually in 2018 and 2019. Peace and prosperity. The then president said it was the greatest economy in the history of the world, and yet we're still borrowing $1 trillion from the future every year. Going forward, we're looking at borrowing maybe $2 trillion a year, and that's led to a fairly politically predictable fight about the debt ceiling. But ultimately, we're not talking about the real driver of debt.
What is the real driver of debt?
Well, the real driver of debt are not the discretionary spends, but the automatic spends of Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. The way those programs are designed, and they're amazingly critical programs, but they're designed for people to have less expenses and a shorter life than people have.
Yeah.
And with the baby boomer now retiring, our demographics are turning negative. So the Social Security trust fund is going to run out of money by the next decade. Medicare, Medicaid trust funds are going to run out of money. And and America already spends more of its GDP on healthcare than any other wealthy nation, and yet we don't live longer. And we're the best place to innovate for health. And happily, if you can afford it. If you're lucky enough to not have economic needs, you can get in to see a world-class specialist pretty early. But the system's not built to sustain the demographics that we're about to embrace, combined with the interest, which now that we're no longer in this disinflationary environment, interest costs, interest payments are going to crowd out a lot of other things that we want to spend for the future: R&D, infrastructure, education.
So, Bruce, what would you say the mood is in Washington right now around debt? Because you and I can discuss the negatives of it all day long, but until people start listening in Washington, not much is going to change.
Yeah, I guess it depends. First, it depends who you ask, and then who you ask, it may depend on whether their party holds the White House or not. And so I recall then Senator Obama saying raising the debt ceiling without doing more is a failure of leadership when he was a senator. And then as a president, he pointed out you really shouldn't mess around with the debt ceiling. Likewise, when President Trump is president, a lot of Republicans on the Hill were comfortable raising the debt ceiling without conditioning it on anything. And when Obama or Biden are the president, Republicans are shocked to find, gambling in the casino debt in the federal budget, and they want to do something about it. To some degree, I think folks, I don't know if it's the word is resigned, but everybody recognizes that to really take on spending challenges would require an act of, maybe political self-immolation. The so-called third rail of politics are entitlement programs. Seniors all vote, and we don't want to do anything that hurts or undermines seniors. However, at some point, it feels like we're just going to keep kicking the can down the road until global markets create the discipline that we don't impose when we can.
Yeah, well, being a debtor nation implies that somebody is going to loan you money. When there's no one left to lend money, that will be a forced change, and it sort of ties in with the first addiction that you mentioned in your slide deck, which is China. China has been lending us massive amounts of money by buying our debt every year. And I think it became very clear. I think a lot of people in Washington knew that we were very dependent on China early on, pre-pandemic. But when the pandemic hit, I think it really became clear to all of us just how dependent we are on China, on China's manufacturing and supply chain services, in addition to them buying our debt. So what's the mood in Washington towards China right now? Because it feels very hot.
No, you're right. If debt and spending may be an area of least bipartisanship, China is the area of most bipartisanship. The old Washington consensus was that engaging China, they would become more like us. They would liberalize. They would be better on human rights. They would be better on market-based economics. They would want to protect intellectual property when they had some of their own, and that was believed by both Presidents Bush, by President Clinton, by the Obama administration, at least at the start. The new consensus is that something changed around the rise of President Xi in China. They became more aggressive. They became more repressive, and particularly as a result of COVID and the war in Ukraine. There's now far less symbiosis in our relationships. It's not quite Highlander. There can only be one. But the overwhelming bipartisan sense is that we need to do a better job of decoupling, de-risking, and containing China. And that involves economic policies, that involves foreign policies, that involves military readiness and alliances. And that is moving full speed ahead. the change from a Trump administration to a Biden administration in no way changed the direction. Arguably, it quickened the pace. It's, the Biden team is a little bit more predictable in policy stuff follows policy processes. But at the same time, they didn't pull back the Trump tariffs, and they haven't pulled back fundamentally the Trump direction if they've from time to time softened the Trump rhetoric.
So what do you see as the positives and negatives of a decoupling from China?
It may depend a little bit on what industry you're in or where you're invested. At the most macro level, I think the positive is the status quo ante was unsustainable. That as we saw, active pharmaceutical ingredients, we needed China. PPE, we needed China. Critical minerals for so much of our manufacturing, especially in technology, we are massively and overly dependent upon someone who is not our geopolitical friend, who does not see the world and share our values. And as a result, that creates an extraordinary amount of risk that we don't want to have, to say nothing. That's at the geopolitical level, let alone as a business matter. If all of your supply chain runs through China and they go into Taiwan, the precedent of Ukraine, Russia suggests, your business may fall apart. Even someone as strong as Apple is at extraordinary risk of their supply chain. So what I think will flow down over the next many years, regardless of the 2024 election, is some combination of pain and opportunity. The pain for businesses may include export controls. And so things that, China it's a very large and growing market. It's the third biggest trading partner we have, but it's going to be harder to sell them things, either because we block the sale or because they block the sale in China. So ask Micron about their memory chips. And now they managed to dodge some of the bullets on our export controls only to run into the crosshairs of Chinese retaliation. There are going to be limits on outbound investment, both what businesses can invest in and what individuals or organizations as limited partners, venture firms, or as private equity may be able to invest in. That's more a matter of when, not if. We'll see how extensive that they are. There have been and will continue to be efforts to focus on human rights violations within your supply chain, not just your direct suppliers, but who are their suppliers and the suppliers of those suppliers, to try to make sure that the businesses' supply chains aren't benefiting from the genocide of the Uyghurs and the slave labor camps and the other things that many groups have identified that are happening over there. That seems like a good thing in for the world of cosmic justice. But if you're a business, how do you even know who the suppliers of your suppliers are, particularly because we're seeing China cracking down on the companies that are trying to create more supply chain transparency. The flip side is if you felt like you were being unfairly competed against by Chinese companies who were dumping things that were subsidized by the government, you now have a U.S. government eager to take up your case. If you felt like that it's way too expensive to build a semiconductor manufacturing facility in the United States as compared to the alternatives, the last Congress put $52 billion towards trying to level the relative costs. If you want to find critical minerals, there's now a lot of effort at government support. What we used to, in the old Reagan era, decry as industrial policy, which was a four-letter word for free marketeers like Milton Friedman, is now being embraced both by Democrats and by Republicans, albeit they tend to attach different strings.
It's not just the United States that became dependent on China. It's the entire world, right? I mean, you have a great slide in your slide deck that shows the number of countries in the world in 2000 that the U.S. was their number one trading partner. And then fast forward to 2018 and how many countries China is the number one partner. And the world goes from U.S. blue to China red in 18 years. It's kind of stunning.
It was visually for sure amazing. And it's two slides in a row. The first points out that America was overwhelmingly the largest manufacturer of goods, and now China is. They became the world's factory, twice the percent of global manufacturing value add as we have. And you're right, the next slide shows visually that we were the top trading partner for 80% of the world at the start of the century, and China now is for a little over 2/3 of the world. For the keen-eyed readers and followers of you, they would note Russia is so geographically big. When you flip Russia to American blue to Chinese red, that has it kind of hits you in the face visually. But look continent by continent when you're looking at the map. Look at South Africa, or look at Africa, look at South America. Look at Australia, and what in Asia, and what you find is it's not simply the giant Russia silhouette, but it's just continent by continent. China is the top trading dog.
There's a feeling among analysts who I speak with, not all of them, but more and more, that a military conflict of some sort with China is inevitable. And that is a pretty, in this day and age, that's pretty scary. What do you think? What's the tone in D.C. with regard to military posture towards China?
Yeah, so I'm not sure I think a direct military confrontation is certain or inevitable, but it's a high risk, and the risk feels like it's growing in the short term. And so on a bipartisan basis, there's a recognition that we need to pivot to Asia. We need to focus on alliances. So things like the AUKUS nuclear submarine deal with Australia and the UK. There is a desire with the so-called Quad, the United States, India, Japan, Australia, to come up with both economic and other geopolitical partnering initiatives. There's a recognition that we need to rethink our military strategy, weapons, and systems. People were talking about this even before the Russia-Ukraine war, but that's made it very clear, as Louis Gave has written about, that the same IT revolution that has radically transformed investing and business and manufacturing has transformed warfare. In the old days, you'd want an aircraft carrier. Now they're high risk of hypersonic missiles and drone swarms coming to get them. And so you're seeing an effort to reinvest and to reinvent military technology and doctrine, and ideally to do so fast enough that we can continue to deter direct military action against ourselves or our allies, because China will never quite perceive the window of opportunity to be sufficient as far as they're concerned. And I point out, it's economically, if we and China start mixing it up, it's mutually assured depression, and their leadership and our leadership don't want that. And likewise, there is a huge risk that things quickly escalate to really, really bad nuclear type outcomes. And again, I don't believe the Chinese Communist Party is not our friend, but they don't want to go up in smoke, and we don't want to go up in smoke. So ideally, as with the Soviets, even though, we are very against one another in so many ways, we will find ways, maybe some proxy wars, but we'll find ways to avoid direct confrontation. And ideally, we will continue through economic and geopolitical alliances to deter the type of aggression that gets you on the slippery slope.
Well, and there's the new form of warfare that isn't quite as obvious, and that brings us to your fourth addiction, which is digital, and the digitization of all things, and cyber warfare and information warfare. I think you could make a good case that China's quite good at those, and that there's a lot of that coming our way, and there's probably a lot going their way from us as well.
Yeah, no, of course you're right. You'd like to hope that the American cyber warriors are not infiltrating critical infrastructure, private sector. I assume we are attempting and hopefully succeeding in infiltrating their government and military systems, and we know they're trying to do ours. And we've seen fingerprints of Chinese hackers in businesses and government. So you're right. That is that and space are sort of the two new domains of warfare that cyber is unfortunately very much active. In space, it feels like people are preparing for what, are they going to take out GPS? What are the alternatives if it comes to that? And information warfare, you're right, it exists. It's been going both ways. They long ago saw things like Radio Free Europe and decided that they wanted to prevent us from having the opportunity with Western media and with Western government sponsors to influence what people see over there. So if you're your average Chinese citizen, you would find no evidence of Tank Man and the Tiananmen Square massacre, even though we all know what happened. We saw it live. they find our system wide open. And so, the Russians and the Chinese and others have been for at least a decade now weighing in, usually through NGOs, but through social media. And it's less finding a candidate they like or dislike, and more they are trying to fan the flames of social division in the United States. And it doesn't take a lot of wind to kick those sparks up. And so they're absolutely waging wars there. The digital addiction also looked at AI, and to me, what's so fascinating, and we're amidst right now the 2023, the great AI freak out of 2023. And you see it in the markets, you see it in government, and the media is going crazy. If you've been following this stuff, we're exactly where you thought we would have been a few years ago with just the ongoing exponential improvement. But GPT-3 to GPT-4 just freaked everybody out. For me, the challenge is that we've had 2 to 3 decades of the internet, and we don't have a federal privacy law. We don't have content moderation controls. We've kind of generally thought that industry would police itself. So we've allowed the negative externalities to grow, and we've been debating whether they've grown too big. But here comes AI. And when you look historically, technology has either been very powerful, think nuclear, think biotech, think hacking tools. And because it's powerful, we've limited the availability. So you can't go buy plutonium at Stroh-Snyder's. Or technology has been ubiquitous, think electricity, think cell phones. And as a result, we've made sure that they're not too powerful. AI increasingly is super powerful and ubiquitous. And to me, I'm not so worried that, the robot overlords are going to come decide that, humans are an inferior species. My worry is these are really powerful tools. And while I think you're a great guy, there are plenty of bad dudes out there. And the way we deal with bad dudes is we don't let them have powerful tools easily obtained. A lot of people would say we already do in guns, that it's too easily available for somebody to get an AR-15, and you see what damage is done by the occasional bad or disturbed person with weapons. When the weapon is digital, the damage can be that much greater. And it's right now, it's taken a little bit of expertise. But man, with open AI, they're making really powerful tools really readily available. And so I think that's why policymakers and a lot of industry leaders say we probably ought to come up with some guardrails here.
Do you think that from what you know, is due to your proximity to Capitol Hill, are they prepared? I mean, this is a really, really complex topic to regulate. And yet you've got the CEO of OpenAI essentially saying you should probably regulate us. That seems like a tall order for a Congress that has to focus on thousands of different topics on any given day.
Yeah, look, the sausage making is messy enough that they don't inspire confidence. Like, oh yeah, they'll nail AI. This is going to be easy. And also, even defining AI is super difficult. And I'm not sure that great industry leaders could give you a unified, consistent definition. AI helps make book recommendations. It helps Netflix find things that that are indeed desired by and relevant to me. It helps Indeed with job seekers, and those are really good applications. I tend to think AI is going to be more net positive for humanity than negative, but I do worry about, I don't want AI that could tell somebody the 6 easy steps for making a bioweapon. I would like something to control and to limit that. The EU is already moving forward with regulations. They're going to happen this year. Some American states are thinking about regulation. That worries me always when you get to the 50 different states with 50 different approaches.
Sounds like a nightmare.
Yeah, I think what you'll find early on is efforts to regulate meaningfully dangerous things that don't get a lot of dispute. Like, yeah, that's pretty dangerous. We ought to figure out a way to control or constrain that. And I wouldn't be shocked to see limited legislative things. I don't think you're going to see one ring to rule them all, the kind of comprehensive AI bill that fixes it all in the near term in this Congress. But I could totally see what they call a Blade Runner law, something that says that if you're going to have a human interacting with a bot, it needs to identify as an automated system so that, I'm just thinking about the 2024 campaign, which is hurtling towards us at fast speed. If I get a call to talk about the campaigns and it's a bot, I ought to be informed that it's a bot. And maybe the bot the bot's going to be reading from the same script that the humans were given. So maybe there will be effectively no difference. But I could see on a bipartisan basis an agreement that requiring automated systems to identify themselves as automated systems is not an impingement upon freedom, nor something that will hamstring our ability to outcompete China in AI.
Wow. That's I hadn't thought of that. That's a pretty things are about to get very interesting.
Oh, look, I mean, micro targeting is about to get more micro. Videos are about to get more viral. Dirty tricks are about to get a lot dirtier. This is going to be the first AI election. I've got 2/3 of an op-ed written on the ways in which I think AI is going to transform the politics and election, but we're certainly not ready for it yet. And just even something as simple as deepfakes, which is not simple, but right now, if I see a video of a candidate, I assume, it is John Kerry talking about that he was for it before he was against it. And, and I hold that against him, or the Trump video about grabbing women. And now the next videos that come out, maybe they're real, maybe they're not. The Trump campaign did a version of The Office, and they put Ron DeSantis's face on the Michael Scott character, but if you watch it, you don't know that it's doctored. It's DeSantis's voice, and it's both funny and really scary.
I have to ask you, how are all these addictions that the U.S. has that you've outlined here and we've talked about today? Do they tie in with each other, and how do you fix them?
Well, it's a great question, Ed, and I find that the biggest challenge, what's most pernicious to me about the addictions, is that they're all interrelated, and efforts to fix one make the others more difficult. So if we were to say, what are the policy responses to deal with overdependence on China? Well, I'd say first, let's help support American national champions in technology to make sure that we were at the leading edge and we were as strong as we could be. But that makes challenges in digital addiction, especially in competition policy aspects of digital addiction, that makes them harder. Next, I'd say, let's do less trading. Let's do export controls. Let's decouple, or at least de-risk some of the supply chains vis-a-vis China. Only that will make inflation get higher, and it'll be harder to deal with the undoing of the easy money decades. And then I'd say, well, let's spend a lot more on R&D and infrastructure and defense, but there goes debt. And likewise, each of the other three challenges, I'll come up with ways to deal with them, but they make the other three addictions deeper and harder. And so ultimately, you need to find the exact way to turn the dials, and and you have to recognize we're going to be tougher on China this year, which will be bad for inflation, but next year, and they're tied together in a way that makes it hard to extricate.
And all of this makes me think back to some things that you and I discussed with others at the conference recently. You heard about Neil Howe's fourth turning, and George Friedman talked about the storm before the calm. Dealing with this, the way Washington is set up today, it feels impossible to me. I mean, it feels like there's going to need to be something new, a big change agent, whether it's an FDR or a Reagan-esque type person that's going to have to come in to affect this change. Otherwise, I just don't see this getting fixed. What do you think? You're in Washington.
Well, so look, three thoughts. First, from the outside, Washington is more of a you-know-what show than I find on the inside. Twitter, okay, cable news, their business models are outrage. They're angertainment. So they're all about highlighting the worst possible things. When COVID first hit, the legislation to initially help, not the stuff that really led to inflation, but the early legislation, 96-0 in the Senate. We can come together as a nation, and we do often come together. The process is messy, and because it's covered by media 24/7, and a media that's looking for heroes and villains and controversy, challenge number one is for most people, we're more disgusted than if we knew all of the facts, we probably would be. Compromise is always challenging and messy. Thought number two, it often takes events. You're right. So, there was the Great Depression, there were world wars. The challenge I sometimes have, and I love Neil Howell's stuff, but I thought the fourth turning, maybe that was going to be 9/11, or maybe that was going to be the Great Recession. That would be it. And then when COVID came, I'm like, here we go. We're now in the fourth turning, or the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I think the last element, and you alluded to this, is you also need the right leadership in place. And you need the circumstance, the event, the huge moment that brings everybody together, married up with, a leader who can rise to the moment. I think Ukraine and Zelensky, of course, that's existential for the nation of Ukraine. But Churchill and the British Empire during World War II, or FDR here in the Great Depression and World War II, Ronald Reagan, coming off the stagflation 70s and the malaise that Carter described. I remain really bullish on America in the medium and the long term. I'm just scared to death in the short term.
I feel the same way. Well, with people like you, hopefully we figure out how to get through it. Bruce, thanks so much. Always good to see you.
Great to see you as well, Ed. Thanks for having me.